But I most certainly was characterized by thinking. I always thought, from early childhood on. And I had a great deal of intuition too. And I had a definite difficulty with feeling. And my relation to reality was not particularly brilliant.
If you are unfortunate enough to have fallen into the deep well of Jungian psychology, no doubt you have experienced, at least in a few moments, this honest feeling of confusion where you are reading Carl Jung or one of his students and you feel like it doesn't really make sense.
Every time I read Jung, it's like reading Nietzsche. It's terrifying because, he's so damn smart that he can think up answers to questions that you don't even... It's not like you don't understand the answers. It's that you never conceptualized the damn questions.
When I read Jung, I feel often that what I'm reading is obscure, potentially out of touch, definitely out of the modern context. Often uses weird and archaic words such as psychic energies or psychic influences. And honestly, on multiple occasions, I felt it's a bit ridiculous. But then the opposite happens where every so often I become fascinated with a little nugget of wisdom that I'm trying to understand, and it really helps me in my personal life.
We need more understanding of human nature because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little.
When I first came across this difficulty reading Jung, I just attributed it to me not knowing enough about psychology, me being born in a different country and in a different time than Jung was. But after a while, I realized that this is a much deeper topic than I first understood it to be.
He read a very large variety of ancient languages and was very familiar with the entire corpus of astrological thought and of alchemical thought and of classic literature and biblical stories.
So in this video, rather than telling you about Carl Jung, I'm going to mention a few facts from his life, and I'm going to give you some context for what life was like at that time. And I think it's going to really shed light on where you probably should not trust Jungian psychology a lot, kind of the ideas that you can reasonably discount as total nonsense, and where the ideas kind of still stand there. So Carl Jung was born in 1875 in Switzerland. Then he attended a medical degree, also in Switzerland, which he completed in 1900. And at the age of 28, he married his fiancée, who was from a wealthy family. So this is not a period when he is actively publishing his theories or discoveries, but later on he will reference this period of time as deeply influential, where he was already working on his theories, but they were not quite finalized yet. In terms of his education, on the positive side, he did study medicine, so clearly he knew something about health and well-being. On the other hand, we should take into account the state of scientific and civilizational knowledge at the time when he went to university. So he was at university up to 1900. So consider the fact that the first use of X-rays in medical images was in 1895. And blood types as a factor for blood transfusion, that was only identified in 1901, after he has graduated. There was no vaccine for tuberculosis at the time. Microbiology was in its infancy.
Medical science itself was still unsophisticated. Many surgeons weren't totally sure what even caused infections.
So yes, Carl Jung was studying medicine, but it was as far removed from a medical degree as possible from what we imagine it to be right now. Even simple and obvious things such as vitamins and nutrition were not well known at the time. The idea of vitamins only came up later on. If Jung is discussing a scientific theory, you should know that at that time science was in every way also in its infancy. It was slowly emerging from whatever was there before. Another really important point is that when Carl Jung was a young guy, women have relatively few rights. They were restricted both in terms of access to education and professions, and in terms of their political rights. Some countries in Europe only guaranteed women a right to vote after World War II. The earliest adopters of women's rights were Finland and Norway, and they adopted voting rights in 1906. So when Carl Jung was already publishing and working on his theories. So in this way, you can see that a large part of Jung's adult life occurred in a period where women were refused the right to vocational qualification or education. Now, in Switzerland, the situation was different. Women were admitted to universities relatively early on. I think the first PhD in Switzerland was awarded to a woman in 1875. Other countries really lagged behind. And the attitude to women's education was also quite varied. It was considered inappropriate appropriate was considered bad for their prospects. This is relevant because actually Carl Jung had many female students and he encouraged women to pursue professional work and education, often in stark contrast to his contemporaries. So this was kind of the cultural milieu in which Carl Jung was formed.